Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with some macro thoughts. The best asset class for the past 24 months has been CO2, according to the market here. Something to think about. I remember a time when it was completely bombed out. The world's most valuable companies by market cap: first Aramco, second Apple, third Microsoft, fourth Amazon, fifth Google. And what's interesting is that the capitalization of some of these companies is a multiple of a number of countries all over the world. Where is the vol? If you're day trading foreign exchange and want to be awake for the vol period, it's London green all the way. Always has been, in point of fact. Home thoughts. This is a marvelous short advertisement for Nike by Eliud Kipchoge via Lord Kipchoge, and it's really terrific. Having watched The Joker recently and also been getting tweets from Therese Jen, who was visiting New York. New York has been uppermost in my mind, and to wit, this was two tweets from Therese. The Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, New York, architectural designer Frank Lloyd Wright. Without doubt, a bizarrely stunning building where art invites you to stand and stare a while. And it's got an extraordinary collection, some of which you can see in the image that she tweeted. And then that's a Jackson Pollock top right, their end of the art lesson for today. So we've experienced her visit vicariously, particularly her rather fancy Halloween get-up, which I must say was very good. This is the Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower, the photographer's Jose Luis Miza via Spectator Index, and it is indeed a spectacular photograph. As is this vertical slow plan at 1/30th of a second as 9-month-old Furaha, which means happiness in Swahili, descends tree in rich afternoon sunlight. It really is. Tremendous photograph by Andy Beavis. It's got that sense of motion and speed. And talking about speed, the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form, not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. That's Paul Virilio, who I think is still very underestimated. I've bought all his books, having read a few excerpts on the internet, and they're short, about 100 pages, but they're mind-bending, specifically as a commentary on contemporary world that we live in. He's passed away now. Listen to this. Coeval emergence of mass media is an industrial army where the capability to war without war manifests a parallel information market of propaganda, illusion, and dissimulation. That's him again. And then in another book called City of Panic, in an era of globalization, he argues, a nation's borders are no longer external, but run through its cities. Nations will have to defend themselves not abroad, but within their own dense metropolises. The metropolitics of globalization will take over the geopolitics of nations. Modern warfare is a war on civilians, which, aided by instantaneous telecommunications, will result in a world civil war, the global equivalent of the riots in Los Angeles after the footage of police officers beating Rodney King was broadcast. Our minds are literally besieged by these weapons of mass communication, as he calls them, creating a panic-driven tele-reality and resulting in an odd kind of emotional synchronization in which terror must be instantaneously felt by all on the scale of global terrorism. Virilio maintains that the global village has created hyper-terrorism as its integral accident, just as derailment is the integral accident of a train. He says the Pentagon is eager to exploit the audio-visual impact of real-time mass communication. Remember Saddam's statue being toppled. But unfortunately, so are the terrorists. The same impulse drives contemporary art, says Virilio, and he often returns to Stockhausen's incendiary remark that 9/11 was the greatest work of art ever. Political Reflections, an influential cleric, is leading the campaign to bring down Pakistan's leader, but the Islamists are really window dressing for an intricate opposition movement. This is the South China Morning Post. Barely 15 months after assuming power, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan faces his first serious political crisis. Hitherto protected by his extraordinarily close relationship with the powerful military, Khan finds Islamabad and his government besieged by tens of thousands of Islamists led by Pakistan's most influential cleric politician, Maulana Fazl-ur-Rahman. With the leaders of the country's two largest mainstream opposition political parties, ex-Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and former President Asif Ali Zardari, behind bars on corruption charges, Rahman has assumed leadership of a campaign against the controversial 2018 elections that brought Khan to power. Rahman has dubbed the protest campaign the Azadi Freedom March. This is reflected in his 4-point charter of demands: the resignation of Khan, fresh elections, non-interference by the military, and the upholding of the constitution in letter and spirit. The military has unabashedly vowed to stand by Khan, talking about how Beijing will view the brewing unrest in Pakistan warily, as would Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And this is a photograph of the Jamiat Ulema Islam leader, Maulana Fazl-ur-Rahman. Look, my view is that Imran has displayed a great deal of finesse and a great deal of elegance in seeking to reconcile seemingly intractable constituencies. I think he's done a tremendous job and he's been very articulate. But you know, Pakistan has always been a hotbed. But in that article, they're implying that it's not really an Islamist face-off. It's the Islamists are fronting it for the opposition parties of Zardari and Sharif. Gordon Sondland, the US ambassador to the European Union, acknowledged his role in what he called a likely quid pro quo between the Trump administration and Ukraine. And as I wrote over the weekend, the Republican Party will be making, I'm sure, a hard-nosed political calculation now that if the president is getting booed at the UFC event, the base is lost. And, you know, this kind of thing with Sondland, he's dropped Trump in it from an enormous height. Trump, of course, was booed at the UFC 244 event at Madison Square Garden. Pollice verso pollice is a Latin phrase meaning with the turned thumb that is used in the context of gladiatorial combat. And now we know that we're going to have public hearings around this issue of quid pro quo, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And from there I take you to the tele-evangelist and White House staffer Paula White, who said to say no to President Trump would be saying no to God. Trump's faith advisor and righteous gemstones character comes to life. Paula White is now an official White House employee. Now this has produced a 4-minute video. It's just quite extraordinary. And that, on that religious note, it takes me to my article over the weekend, which was at the moment of vision, the eyes see nothing. And I was saying how, as I've gotten older, that even the world seems to move in a non-linear fashion. Officials at USAID have warned that favouring Christian groups in Iraq could be unconstitutional and inflame religious tensions. When one colleague lost a job, they said she had been penced. That's a report in ProPublica. Vice President Pence, who's an evangelical Christian, is the coming man, and this could happen quite quick. A warning which has been written by an unnamed senior White House official claims high-level White House aides are certain that the Vice President would support the use of the 25th Amendment to have the President removed from office. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution says that if the President is deemed unfit to discharge the duties of his office, the Vice President would assume the role. So I think we're going to see some dramatic developments in the US, and President Trump is moving closer and closer towards that moment when he'll seek some kind of managed exit. A newly installed surveillance camera at the Nathan Road and Jordan Road intersection in Hong Kong, that's from W.B. Yeats, 1865. That takes me back to something I've written where I said Z is building an algorithmic society and you need cameras in order to run your algorithms. And I was also saying at the beginning of October, the folks in Hong Kong whom Z is seeking to unmask so you can exercise algorithmic control over them are in open rebellion. I tweeted yesterday conservatives who are a shoo-in on the economy, because let's not forget that Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn are unreconstructed Trotskyists, and some of these ideas they've got are balmy. And they're closing private schools. The private schools in the UK are a calling card for the United Kingdom globally. It's a phenomenon of soft power. It is criminal to consider that you would close them down. Then furthermore, the UK, specifically outside Europe, needs to be attractive to the rest of the world, and you've got to keep it that way. And I'm very worried about Corbyn. I remember when I was in England and with my uncle Firoz and Nassim, who were very politically minded, and Corbyn and Diane Abbott were bonkers. And now they've suddenly come back. But having said that, the Conservatives are showing a lack of touch and finesse, which is surreal. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Conservative Party chairman, I watched yesterday, it's frightening. And therefore, Corbyn is a very good campaigner. And I think, actually, Boris is in a worse position than even Theresa May was. Blood Gold in the Brazilian Forest by the New Yorker's John Lee Anderson is a long read, but really tremendous. One day in 2014, Belém, a member of Brazil's Kayapo tribe, went deep into the forest to hunt macaws and parrots. He was helping to prepare for a coming-of-age ceremony in which young men are given adult names and have their lips pierced. By custom, initiates wear headdresses adorned with tail feathers. Belém, whose Kayapo name is Takatix, an honorific form of the word strong, was a designated bird hunter. And then talking about how gold prices have tripled to $1,400 an ounce, and an influx of new miners have come back to try their luck. Wildcat mining is less pervasive than logging, but it can be more insidious. Loggers usually harvest valuable trees and leave the rest. Miners cut everything Mercury used in the refining process leaves rivers poisoned, and the pollution can spread hundreds of miles downstream. The allure of gold attracts fortune seekers who bring prostitution, alcohol, drugs, and violence. Letting prospectors into the Kyopo Reserve is like leaving your children in the protection of a drug gang, Barbara Zimmerman. The destruction of Kyopo land is just part of what Zimmerman calls the sacking of the Amazon. Brazil's National Institute of Space Research, which tracks the damage, calculates that 1/5 of Brazil's Amazonian rainforest, the world's largest remaining green lung, which absorbs billions of tons of carbon dioxide, has been destroyed since the 1970s. It's like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have been let loose, Zimmerman said. John Lee Anson took several flights over the forest, and one as the plane cleared the treetops, I saw smoke rising in a huge menacing column like a cloud of volcanic ash. Thomas Lovejoy, an American biologist who for decades has been a preeminent authority on the Amazon, told me that the burning of forests, along with climate change, was disrupting the Amazon's ability to produce rain for itself. We're now seeing historic droughts every 4 or 5 years, he said. The problem with droughts is that they dry up rivers and cause more fires, leading to more deforestation. The Amazon, he noted, produces 20% of the world's rainwater. If the system is pushed too far out of balance, the forest will cease to be able to regenerate itself and turn into a savanna. A carbon sink nearly the size of the continental United States will become a carbon producer. We're really close to the tipping point right now, Lovejoy said. This reserve, much of their land sits uneasily alongside indigenous reserves, which constitute about 13% of the national territory, more than 400,000 square miles, in which approximately 900,000 people live. They are what remain of an estimated 11 million indigenous people who lived there when the Portuguese arrived in 1500. Since last January, when Bolsonaro became president, the destruction has become a kind of perverse political goal. Bolsonaro, a former army captain whose followers call him the legend, is an unabashed racist, homophobe and misogynist. A climate change denier, he came to power with a vehemently anti-environmentalist message, supported by a powerful lobby known as the 3 Bs: Bibles, bullets and beef, meaning evangelicals, gun advocates and the agri-business industry. The Indians do not speak our language, they do not have money, they do not have culture, he once said. How did they manage to get 13% of the national territory? Since last year, the rate of deforestation in Brazil has increased nearly 40%, with thousands of fires, many of them intentionally set, scorching forests across the Amazon. Of course, he had a tiff with Macron, who said our house is burning, literally. Bolsonaro indignantly accused Macron of a colonialist mentality, unacceptable in the 21st century. His tourism ambassador, a former mixed martial arts fighter named Renzo Gracie, told Macron, "The only fire going on is the fire inside Brazilian hearts, and our president's heart, you clown. Come over here, you'll be caught by the neck. That chicken neck, you don't fool me." Interest in the Amazon isn't about the Indians or the fucking trees, it's about mining. For Bolsonaro, gold prospectors serve as a symbol of the country's pioneer spirit, much as West Virginia coal miners do for Trump. In Brazil, illegal mining is estimated to bring in more than $1 billion a year. For Bolsonaro, an apparently unconscionable amount of money to give up. We can't keep living like poor people on earth that is so rich, he said. We want to include the Indians in our society, and a large part of them want it that way too. Most women adorn their limbs with black paint like leopard spots, and their cheeks with geometric designs. Their scalps are shorn in a distinctive V. The men traditionally wear their hair shoulder length and their bodies intricately painted. In the 80s, the Kayapo were known as committed activists. There was less disease then. Now there was leishmaniasis, akin to leprosy, and also malaria. The opening of the reserve was the subject of a long fight in Bellam's family. Born in 1703, he was a nephew of Tutu Pombo, a wily, flamboyant chief who had grown rich in the 80s as he negotiated with whites to extract mahogany and gold from the jungle. At the riverside, the effects of mining become impossible to ignore. The water of the Rio Branco, the river that runs past the community, was a nauseous pale yellow. The settlers came. It's exactly like what happened in the United States in the 1830s and 1840s. The land gets cleared, the Indians get pushed back. The reason the Kayapo got as much land demarcated as they did for their reserves is that they were tough guys, warriors, and people were afraid of them. The first thing the Kayapo traded was jaguar skins. Pilots flew in to get skins for the fashion industry, and it progressed from there to logging and gold. Then in an office on a street lined with brothels, Weston Kleber Guimares, a spare-looking lawyer, acknowledged that illegal gold was the lifeblood of the local economy. He estimated that some $15 million worth a month was being extracted from the pits nearby. Money laundering is a big business here, he said mildly. When I expressed amazement that an operation as big as his neighbours could have gone undetected, Kleber laughed. Here it's the law of silence. Taking out a calculator, Kleber explained that the untapped resources in the Kayapo Reserve represented an incalculable fortune. There are 25 cubic meters of harvestable wood per hectare, he said, punching buttons. That makes 25 million cubic feet of wood, which in turn is worth about 25 billion reals, roughly $6 billion. That's a conservative estimate. There are about 9,000 Kayapo living in that whole area, which means if the wealth they extracted were distributed evenly among them, each of them would be rich. But today they're living in misery, people in a zoo where you go and take pictures of them. The Kayapo could be billionaires. The trade in gold provides an index of global sentiment, talking about the fact we can't distinguish between dirty and clean gold. And then the gold rush, this fellow in 1983 followed talk of a gold rush at a place called Castello de Sonhos, or Castle of Dreams. You can't make this up, can you? It's easier for a man to become a prospector than for a prospector to become a man. He meant that once gold fever gets into your blood, it doesn't easily leave. This summer, when fires in the Amazon attracted scrutiny, Bolsonaro claimed that the NGOs had set them in order to discredit his administration. On Brazil's far right, it is an article of faith that NGOs are conspiring with outside powers to seize control of the Amazon. In Sao Paulo, a Bolsonaro advisor named Dom Bertrand de Orleans e Braganca told me that environmentalists were akin to a communist insurgency, saying Greens are the new Reds. Wow. So very well worth reading in full. That's why I spent some time on it. And here are some photographs. All of us here realize we're fucking the environment. Jorge Silva, 48-year-old miner. It's not like we want to, it's that we haven't found any alternative means to survive. Kupato is the 45-year-old chief of Turajam, seen here standing outside his home. In the past few years, hundreds of thousands of acres of the Kayapo Reserve have been destroyed or degraded by illegal mining and logging. The Kayapo provide a good example of how conservation is an actual war, an NGO official said. Kenjam, an isolated village at the heart of the 26 million acre Kayapo Reserve, prohibits prospecting and logging. In addition to miners and loggers, soy farms and cattle ranchers have also infiltrated the area. Brazil's National Institute of Space Research tracks the damage, calculates that 1/5 of Brazil's Amazonian rainforest has been destroyed since the 1970s. The world might actually run out of people, according to this article in Wired. By 2050, there will be 9 billion carbon-burning, plastic-polluting, calorie-consuming people on the planet. By 2100, that number will balloon to 11 billion, pushing society into a Soylent Green scenario. Such dire Population predictions aren't the stuff of sci-fi. Those numbers come from one of the most trusted world authorities, the United Nations. But what if they're wrong? Not like off by a rounding error, but like totally, completely goofed. That's the conclusion Canadian journalist John Ibbitson and political scientist Darrell Bricker come to in their newest book, Empty Planet. Future of the human species, in roughly 3 decades, the global population will begin to decline. They're right. Once that decline begins, it will never end. Saying these UN population data is something we call vertical knowledge, or everybody knows knowledge, whether it's the Prime Minister of a country, a university academic, a business leader, what is happening with the population. Oh, it's terrible, there's a huge population explosion. Most of the time, reality has already moved past where that vertical knowledge resides. There was a moment when we were sitting in this little school in Srivanaspuri, listening to a focus group of 13 or 14 women who lived there, and I kept seeing this faint glow light up under their saris. I didn't know what it was, and then I saw one woman reach in and pull out a smartphone and look at it and put it back. And I realized here we are in a slum in Delhi, and all these women have smartphones. Who can read? Who have data packages? And I was thinking, they're all human knowledge in their hands now. What's the impact of that going to be? UN forecasting model inputs 3 things: fertility rates, migration rates, and death rates. It doesn't take into account the expansion of education for females or the speed of urbanization. And he's saying these are linked. He's gone to see some guy called Wolfgang Lutz in Vienna. First things we did, he walked me through his projections, and I walked out of the room gobsmacked. All he was doing was adding one new variable to the forecast, the level of improvement in female education, and he comes up with a much lower number for global population in 2100, somewhere between 8 and 9 billion. I'm basically saying this is happening even in Africa, and we're missing it. As I said in my article, The End is Nigh, I was quoting Greta Thunberg: people are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We're in the beginning of a mass extinction. All you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? Trails of death and destruction, ideologically infected human souls, and biologically perverted children. That's Bolsonaro. And I said Greta was referencing the feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse. The most referenced poem today is W.B. Yeats' The Second Coming: turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. And I said it's easy to see why. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar 110.62. Dollar index 97.986. Japanese yen 108.73. Swiss franc 0.9925. The pound 128.46. The Australian dollar 0.6872, India rupee 71.02, South Korean won 11.60, Brazilian real, that's popped back over 4.0832, Egyptian pound 16.14, and the rand, some of the euphoria wearing off, 14.83. Dollar index, this is a chart, and we're staging a little bit of a recovery. Let's keep an eye on that. Euro dollar, this is from FX Pip Titan. 110.62. I think a lot of the bad news is in the price, and we're now seeing interest rates, particularly at the long end, begin to normalize. Sterling 128.47. China's first euro-denominated government bond in 15 years has been gobbled up, raised 4 billion euros, orders close to 20 billion euros, bonds had maturities of 7, 12 and 20 years, with yields of 0.197, 0.618%, and 1.078%, which was attractive when you compare it to European sovereign bonds. Gold, this is a chart from Tarek FX2, last trading at 14.91. Crude oil had a poor session yesterday, last trading 56.38, but I think we're going to be at 58 by Friday's close. Hot demand for frontier debt is poised to start cooling off. Investors in frontier market bonds are on course to get their best returns in 7 years. It looks like it'll be a lot tougher in 2020. Some of the biggest money managers are already becoming more selective. BNP Paribas Asset Management oversees $500 billion is sticking to countries with sound fiscal management such as Ivory Coast, or those with investment grade ratings like Kazakhstan, Uruguay and Morocco. Aberdeen sees opportunities to get above market returns by buying the bonds of Sri Lanka, Ecuador and Ghana. Rising debt loads, increasing prospect of defaults in Argentina, Lebanon and Zambia are making investors nervous. We're going to have more and more defaults in the asset class, says Brian Carter. Argentina, Lebanon and Zambia, they're coming up. Total debt in frontier markets rose to a record 3.2 trillion in the second quarter of 2019, equivalent to 115% of GDP. More than 40% are under debt stress or at high risk, nearly double the proportion in 2013. The average yield for the frontier index is 6.3%, about 117 basis points above that for emerging markets overall. It's gained 17% this year, the most since 2012, and is a humongous sell. 14th of October, I said you will agree that the overall picture is not very pretty. I said the canary in the coal mine is Zambia. I said also it seems to me that we are at a pivot moment and we can keep regurgitating the same old mantras like a stuck record, and if we do that, this turns Ozymandias. 29th of July, I said the French-speaking countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal are in a sweet spot in large part precisely because of the stability of the euro anchor. And I also said then, from an economic perspective, balance sheets are fully loaded and the exposure to foreign markets quite high. And I was also saying a precursor for what has to be a deteriorating ratings trend line. Trump just had a meeting with top representatives from Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to help solve their long-running dispute on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Interestingly, it's Steve Mnuchin who's been leading that effort. More Russian action in Africa. This is from AM Live Mon. Russia's Kamaz to set up military factory in Mozambique. Russia's Rostec is completing the creation of maintenance, repair and overhaul center for Mi-817 helicopters based at the Haiwan factory for developed industries in Egypt. I wrote about the Russian intervention on the 20th of October in an article called From Russia with Love. The Bangwato looked at the issues on their merits. With Kama campaigning for his new party in the UDC, many Bangwato rejected their chief. This is a very interesting analysis in the Africa report about why Ian Kama did not do well in this election. He damaged the BDP in the central region. His people also rejected the politicization of their ethnicity. Saying Botswana Air Force ferried Masisi and his colleagues around the country to campaign for the opposition. The clearest lesson is that they must unite against the ruling party. For a country of less than 700,000 voters, to have 5 opposition parties looks self-defeating. That's correct. Divide and rule. This is what happens, this is what awaits South Africa if Moody's cuts its rating to junk. The gloomiest reckoning would trigger more than $10 billion of outflows and cause the rand to weaken to its lowest level in almost 4 years. Others say investors have already priced in a downgrade and South African assets may even rise in the aftermath, especially if sentiment towards emerging markets stays strong. So if Moody's does downgrade South Africa, rand bonds will be excluded from the FTSE World Government Bond Index, which comprises 14 currencies, including the dollar and yen, and has about $3 trillion tracking it. As I said, I was quoting a fellow called Daniel Marvin who said there is a new sex position called the Ramaphosa, get on top and do nothing. South African oil shares up 9.32% year to date. Dollar rand is at 14.833, which is still in that 1550 range. Egyptian pound is at 16.138. EGX 30 is up 12.84% year to date. Nigerian oil share is down 16.57% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 13.58% year to date. Uganda will begin refurbishing its century-old rail network this month to boost bulk cargo transportation after failing to secure $2.2 billion in Chinese funding for a new standard gauge rail line, a senior rail official said. Bulk cargo transporters have been eager for cheaper transport and were disappointed when China did not offer funding for the Ugandan section of the Standard Gauge Railway Regional Project. It was originally designed to connect Kenya's Indian Ocean seaport of Mombasa to a vast hinterland including Uganda, South Sudan, Rwanda and Burundi. A commuter train is seen at the Uganda Railways Corporation headquarters in Kampala in this photograph by Reuters. And in October I wrote about this. I said, had they been taking notes at FOCAC, they would have heard Xi Jinping speak of the end of vanity, which I characterized at the time as a substantive linguistic recasting of China-Africa by Xi Jinping. They're not funding this stuff anymore. It's the end of the line. Of course, the end of vanity is from Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Kenya's Senate backs raising of the government's debt ceiling to 9 trillion shillings as authorities abandon a limit pegged to the GDP due to a growing debt burden. Total public debt rose to 62.3% of GDP in June this year, the World Bank said last week. Government officials say the increase in the ceiling will also unlock 421 billion shillings worth of loans with foreign development agencies, which have been agreed but are yet to be signed due to the current breach of the ceiling. The government will not have been able to plug a deficit of 6.2% of GDP, equivalent to 635 billion shillings, in its budget for the 2019-2020 fiscal year if the ceiling had not been raised. If you look at the borrowing in Kenya today, 90% is being done by the Republic. Kenya is approaching the situation that there was in Greece, said James Orengo. When you're in a hole, you have to stop digging, so this is our only way out so we can restructure our debts, said Moses Correa. As I said, it seems to me we're at a pivot moment and we can keep regurgitating the same old mantras like a stuck record. If we do this, it all turns Ozymandias. We had hope, but we never saw what equity would ever become a movement inspired by individual aspirations and dreams. We are certain by next year that we'll bridge the trillion-shilling balance sheet. Dr. James Mungie. Equity is up 44.19% year to date. Market cap is $1.86 billion. KCB is up 5.97% yesterday, up 42.19% year to date. The big banks have had a storming run since the rate cap was, since talk about the removal of the rate cap came into the market. Nairobi All Shares up 17.49%, the NSE 20 is down 2.37%. I think we're getting overcooked in the big banks because the underlying economy is not that strong. Thank you for stopping by.